Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Now because there's a crossover coming up in Ecto Kid, we have to go through some Saint Sinner issues. They're part of the Clive Barker universe as well, from the Razorline of Marvel. Now, the 5th issue, I believe it is, of Ecto Kid is part 2, or part 1 of a 2-part crossover with Saint Sinner. So we're going to go through these and see what's up. Well, we've got a foil embossed cover, which is from the 90s. It looks really cool, but it's usually a sign of low-end interiors. As we learned with Ecto Kid, I can be wrong on that. This time, not so much. This is kind of terrible, honestly. Now, it's written by Elaine Lee. Max Douglas is the artist. Christine Shiel is the colorist. Mark McLaren, editor. Malcolm Smith, consulting editor. Carol Potts, executive editor. And Tom DeFalco, editor-in-chief. So we start out with a guy running through the streets, grabs his head, jumps in the water, and he's hearing voices. And then we got the intro there. It says Tale of the Barkerverse. And we learn that the main character is actually only 16 years old. But if you look at the art, he looks like he's about 35. And that's because the art style is these heavy, thick lines, and it makes it have kind of a distorted perception of what's going on. Doesn't help that everybody has long hair, so it's kind of hard to get a good look at the facial structure, but there's a lot of ambiguity and ages. I had a hard time telling a few of the characters apart at times. Yeah, we're following this kid around and he's talking about, going down in the sewers with his friends, and there's a voice in his head. Oh, his name is Phillip Fetter, by the way. And the voice tells him that his friend's got a nice jacket and he should have a jacket like that. So he murders his friends. And then he sees some cheerleaders and the voice tells him he should have one of those. And then there's a cheerleader in a dumpster. And the only thing he manages to resist is hearing the voice tell him to kill his mom, and he doesn't. He drops the knife and runs. And then tries to kill himself by jumping in the water, but he's pulled out by a black lady who tries to give him CPR, and then he strangles her to death and absorbs her soul. And her soul is angelic and keeps the demon at bay. And I'm not clear on whether he's schizophrenic or not. Obviously, as we go, we learn that he's not completely crazy, but he's in some extra dimensional place now where he's tied up with some other beings. And the dialogue is pretty atrocious. The parts where he's talking to, the angel and the demon, that's actually fairly interesting. The concepts are really good, but it's a poor execution, in my opinion. So anyway, he's in this prison, and he breaks free somehow. It's very, you know how? Oh, okay. So he just touches stuff and he's free. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So him and these other prisoners that he just somehow frees open a doorway to some place called the Amen. And I'm quoting here, the place where all prayers come to an end and none are answered. And somehow he leads these people through there before these creatures called the Smiths can get them. And he somehow teleports everybody back to the sewer. And then he shuts the portal on a few of them. And it's just him and 2 or 3, or 3, I guess, other creatures. And they're back at the crime scene where these 1940s style detectives are looking at the dead lady, and she's wearing a medallion for the Saint Sinner. Yeah, and there's a drunk guy who's like a stereotypical rummy from a 40s movie. And it kind of ends there with the cops busting him, sort of. I don't know, it's not a very good issue. I don't like the art. I think it's an interesting art style, but it doesn't really work well with the story they're trying to tell, I don't think. And the fact that I think the artist wasn't quite ready for mainstream work. It's got more of an indie feel to it, or at least a slightly untrained feel. It looks more like an independent book, something you would find, for a slightly inflated price from a publisher you've never heard of. So I can't recommend this one. It was almost painful to read. It gave me a little bit of a headache. It's not exactly clear what's going on. How his powers work is completely ambiguous. I can't talk. It's so bad. Yeah, I didn't like it. I thought the character was older too. He looks like a guy in his 30s, and I guess he's only supposed to be 16 or something. Maybe it said something about stealing 9 years, so maybe he aged somehow. I don't know. It's not real clear. I don't think the creative team was the right choice for this book. From what I can tell, the concept is fairly interesting about somebody that's warring with voices in his head, like a corrupted Shazam kind of thing, but it's just not executed very well. And the creatures all look pretty disturbing, so there's that, like, having that charcoal style with the monster and the angel. Okay, yeah, that would have worked. And then have like a regular style for the main character. So you can kind of differentiate between what's in his head and what's not a little better. And it is kind of interesting how they have like different caption boxes and styles for the angel and demon. The angel has more of an old English, and the demon has like a serial killer's ransom letter sort of thing. And if they had done something like that, I probably would have liked it better, but no, this one really didn't do it for me. So we're gonna have to power through and hope issue 2's better. So we'll look at that in another episode. Until then, as always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode. Today we are looking at Saint Sinner issue 2, published through Marvel's Razorline imprint. The creative team is not listed in this issue, at least not that I could find, but I think it's the same group that worked on issue 1. It's definitely the same artist. And I have to say that the work is not improving. Parts of this one were pretty good, but it was still that same kind of confusing feeling that we got with the first issue. This one sort of picks up where we left off. Now he's got one of the police officers tied up instead of surrendering to him like it looked like he was going to at the end of last issue. And he decides to go on a venture by himself and leave this officer alone with these 3 extra-dimensional beings. So, from what I can tell of the story, and it's not real clear, it looks like he's aged about 9 years. So he actually looks like he's in his 20s, but it's really not clear because the detective that's looking for him, Sergeant Duffy, is talking about like only a week's gone by and this kid's disappeared and there's all these deaths and whatnot. But then we cut back to Philip and he's talking about how he's been gone for 9 years. And so he goes home and he tries to cure his grandfather of like dementia or something. And then he kills his dog. I don't know what's going on. Then there's these other 3 creatures that are goofing around and they're disposing of the bodies, and they throw the tentacle creature from that they had sealed the portal on. About half of him got cut up, and yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And then we go back to Philip at his house, and he makes one of the plants grow somehow. It's not really explained. But then the detective shows up and shows him the medallion. He reaches for it and zaps the guy's hand. And then a bunch of people shoot him with tranq darts somehow through a window. So while he's unconscious, he has this psychedelic vision of the demon voice trying to get him to kill his younger self. And he wakes up screaming in a padded cell with an ambulatory camisole on. But this straitjacket doesn't do a lot for him. And in the meantime, his 3 friends, we don't know what happened to they end up capturing another cop. We have no idea what happened to them. I assume they're dead. I don't know. But the other 3 go through an extra-dimensional portal and create their own universe or own planet in a dormant universe or some nonsense. And the creature called Bull Baby is the rage. This plant lady's got seeds, so she's like this Mother Earth creature. And I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. This series desperately wants to be Sandman. It's trying very hard to be intellectual, but it's not really working. The art I thought might grow on me, but it really doesn't work very well for me in really almost every panel. And it's incredibly confusing. Apparently his powers are the Saint Sinner's powers are somehow time related. He can like decay things. Like he decays his straitjacket so that it mildews up and he can rip it off. And then the Kanto guy pulls him through the portal, and the tentacle thing is alive, eating fish, and then eats a couple of guys that are giving somebody the mafia treatment He's got concrete overshoes on, and they're going to dump him in the lake. Well, the tentacle monster grabs them and pulls them in the water, and the guy's left on the pier. That's the issue. It doesn't make a lot of sense, aside from trying to be some deep intellectual book, and it didn't work for me. I think if you're an angsty 13-year-old, you might get more out of it than I did, but it just came off as pop pseudo-intellectualism dressed up in bad art and mediocre writing. I would like to say better things because I think the concept is interesting and it could be a good book, but they just executed it very, very poorly. So again, much like issue 1, this is a miss for me. I'm hoping the series picks up and they even the art out a little bit, but I don't think it's going to. I read this back when it first came out, but I didn't remember any of it, honestly, and I can see why it's fairly forgettable. You're going to read it once and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and then put it away and never look at it again. So yeah, I would tend to avoid this issue just like the first one. I don't think it's going to be difficult to jump into any issues since I don't have any idea what's going on anyway. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you on the next episode. Hopefully issue 3 will be better. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we are looking at Saint Sinner issue 3. This is from Marvel's Razorline imprint, which was characters created by Clive Barker. Now we pick up where we left off, more or less. That's kind of hard to tell passage of time here. We're with the Saint as he's talking to the two spirits that live in his head, the demon and the saint, I guess, or angel. It's a very convoluted story. Effectively, he's trying to learn more about them, and it's a little vague as it's told through flashbacks of sitcoms that he saw and movies and sort of thing. Basically, there's 3 people sharing one space, which is in his mind. You've got the angel, the demon, and of course Phillip. So we learn, in fact, the demons that were attacking him previously, known as the Smiths, were actually freed by his friend Kanto, and they broke up. They were originally like one being that broke apart into many from the sound of it, and there are 6 of them. And I guess it's Saint Sinner's job to stop them and answer people's prayers, maybe? I'm not real clear on it. The demon and the angel are inhabiting him, the angel to cancel out the demon, or some nonsense like that. Then we go over to Kanto, and he meets himself. Past self meets a future self in a place that he constructed in the future, but he regards himself as an enemy at that point because this future self is trapped in this place, but his past self is not. So the future version of Kanto tells the past version of Kanto that there is a monster in the harbor, and he has to go back in time and talk to Frank Kelly, who is going to design an album cover and create some various stories on parchment. And then past Kanto is going to go back to the far distant past to create the legend of the Saint Sinner. Future Kanto is stuck in this place called the Vertesque, but he can't time jump anymore or do any of the dimensional hopping or anything like that. The past version of him goes, and that's when the Saint Sinner shows up, and they talk, and they find out that, in fact, the creature that had escaped with them, that got split into a tentacle, is still alive and in the Chicago harbor and is killing people, and the Saint has to go and stop it. And they open a gate together, and the Saint emerges out of the gate in what appears to be a park, and that's where the issue ends. It's pretty interesting that at one point, by trying to block out the prayers, the Saint's face mutates to look suspiciously like the demon. Yeah, it's another convoluted issue. It's trying really hard to be deep and intellectual, like the Vertigo lines of the time, like Books of Magic and Sandman, and I don't think it quite works. It's a good effort, but I think they're trying a little too hard. Elaine Lee was in over her head, and I don't particularly care for Max Douglas's artwork. The way Kanto is drawn is kind of neat. Is definitely an interesting method of taking like a swirly photograph and using it as his jacket, and that was kind of cool, but it was pretty innovative for its time. But computers have really made that more of a passe thing at this point, because anybody could do it with Photoshop. But yeah, overall, it was pretty forgettable issue. The story could be really good, but I don't think that the creative team was the right fit for this book. They probably just took the job to try and get some mainstream credit, which I totally understand that, but I think they got in a little over their head, and the story just isn't quite worth. So I'm gonna have to say this one is probably another miss, and it's looking like the series as a whole, there's a reason it only lasted 7 issues. But we'll check out issue 4 next time and see how it looks. Hopefully we'll get to that in a day or two, so we can get back on track and get to the crossover with Ecto Kid. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Bad Comic Review. Just finished reading Saint Sinner issue 4. This is from Marvel's Razorline imprint in 1993. This issue is for the January 94. Now, we pick up with the Saint coming through some sort of gate, and there's a whole bunch of nonsense. So he takes some hippies' sunglasses, which supposedly turns the hippie's hair gray, although it looks exactly the same to me in the inking. Then he's supposed to find whoever is praying to him. It takes a really long time to get to that, but there's some guy working as an ad man who works for this really rude guy that thrives off of fear, and he had read an article about a sea monster in the Chicago waters, so he wants to make an ad for a delivery service out of that same scenario that ended with issue 2. But instead of just a guy getting thrown overboard, he's holding a package from the National Express. That's when the tentacles are coming up. So it's a little ludicrous. Then the Saint uses his weird plant growth ability to stop a purse snatcher and trying to convince this guy that he is who he says he is. Then we cut over to the commercial being filmed, except the real tentacle monster grabs the actor, pulls him under, and presumably eats him. So the Saint gets there just a moment too late and manages to create some algae that turns into a glide sled that leads him across the water. The monster takes another victim as he advances the algae's evolution into some sort of breathing mask and goes underwater. Okay, that part was kind of neat. Then he goes underwater where the monster recognizes him as the person who betrayed him and left him to die. The Saint Sinner listens to the demon and tries to accelerate the creature's advancement. And then somehow a rift opens to the place called the Amen, where the other half of the monster was. But suddenly, the demon smiths pop out of a monster's mouth. Not real sure if it's the same monster or the one in the other universe, whatever. And the demons possess the director guy, who looks all crazy, and goes out to film the interchange. And he's all psychotic looking. And the guy that had been praying goes out to stop him, but it's too late. He rams his boat, but the demon-possessed man escapes. Presumably this prayer guy died. Very convoluted. I have no idea what's going on. Then the demon thing that was in the Saint frees itself as the two monsters touch. Then there's some sort of like weird squiggly line thing, and the demon comes flying back because it couldn't escape. Angel half says, "You've killed us, sinner," and he is expelled from his own body, I guess. Flies up into outer space before crash landing in what looks like a field. I have no idea what's happening in this book. It's trying too hard to be intellectual, and the story is lost in between. And it keeps happening. I can see they're trying very hard to make this some sort of pseudo-intellectual book like Sandman was, and it's just not working. Each issue is more convoluted than the last, and they don't really explain how he knows how to use his powers. He seems to just act on instinct, but they don't explain well enough what he's actually doing, the cause or the effect. So I never know what's going on. But the next issue is the crossover with Ecto Kid, so maybe that will make more sense. So we'll look at Ecto Kid 5 in the next episode or so, sometime this week. We'll look at both stories in one day. I'm going to try and do it on Thursday. Yeah, I can't recommend this book. It just doesn't make any sense at all. And if you think that it's being intellectual, it's not. It's just trying really hard to look that way. And the art's still pretty horrible. I can't tell what's going on. I don't like the art style. the writing is pretty awful. I don't know. I'm sorry. I do not like this book. Hopefully the next issue's better. But that'll do it for this episode. As always, thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another episode of Bad Comic Review. Today we are looking at Saint Sinner issue 5. Now this is the second part of Sir Sigmund's Arcadia. It's a crossover with Ecto Kid, and if you watched the previous episode, you saw you heard where we reviewed that one. Now this is part 2 of the story, like I said, and it picks up sort of where we left off. For some reason, the demon caught up with them while they were fleeing, I guess. It's not exactly explained. And Dex tells Phillip to summon his coins out of the creature, and he manages to get 4, and it weakens the creature sufficiently that the demon starts coming apart, and souls start escaping him, and that turns him into some sort of goo, which is kind of gross. Dex and Phil start to leave, but Dex doesn't really want to be alive, Philip doesn't really want to be alive again, and Dex ends up separated from him and starts heading home back to his physical body. Now, he's supposed to be looking for his father, but he doesn't want to take the chance that he's weakened his physical body too much. That leaves Philip in the ectosphere and runs across this blonde girl, Bitsy, that he had met in the previous part. It was one of the girls that picked him up when he first crash landed into the ectosphere. And he agrees to help her, and it's obviously a trick, because you can see it on the panel, that he is being played because every soul has a weakness, so Sir Sigmund is toying with him. Well, we cut back to this guy Perry, who was the one who started this whole mess. Turns out he's still alive, which I guess is good, and he runs across Philip's living body, which literally runs into him with his little car. And Phil is not in the body, but the demon and angel are arguing it out, and they want to hurt Perry. Well, the demon does, but the angel manages to tell the human to push him out, which he does. He pushes him out of the car. Then we go back to Dex, who is eating a slice of pizza while riding a motorcycle that apparently he stole, that wasn't in here. He is on the run trying to find where Arcadia is in the real world so that he can jump right into it in the ectosphere. Meanwhile, Philip is hanging out with this girl, and he's at the gun range again shooting those poor little ghost things. And he smooches with the girl, and that's when we see that, in fact, Tequila the worm is in her ear, and when they break apart from the kiss, she has an ecto coin in her mouth. And Dex can kind of see what's going on through his ecto eye, and he jumps into the ectosphere in his physical body and calls the girl succubus and pushes her away. That's when the demon reappears and absorbs the girl back into him. Now, they had mentioned that the demon only eats children's souls, so Philip remembers that at this point as the creature tries to absorb him, and he ages himself back to his actual physical age, which is closer to 25 or so, and he apparently is supposed to have been looking 16. I can't tell how old these people are. The art is a little vague. So he summons his coins back, splatters the demon apart, so Sir Sigmund is destroyed, and all the kids start to head to what's beyond the ectosphere, and they say they're going home now. It's a job sort of well done, I guess. The Ecto Kid has to go back to the physical world, and he's separated from Philip, and Philip is told that he's almost home to his body, and it cuts to his physical body with his creepy eyes, saying that the demon will be free soon. Yeah, it's a very strange issue, but it's definitely better than... I know I'm not describing it well because it was a pretty mediocre story, but it's significantly better than the previous issues of Saint Sinner. And now I think what happened was there was a lot of oversight and control over where the story had to go and what it had to be doing, and they were aiming originally for a more philosophical storyline like Sandman. They were trying to copy that success, but you could tell that Eileen Lee either wasn't comfortable with that or wasn't well educated in the philosophies. I think that her writing is a lot more solid in this book than it is in the others, and it's pretty obvious that she has some talent for telling a story, and working in the confines of what she was assigned. So this definitely shows that, she should be working on a Marvel comic. It just, I think, was a poor fit. I think probably would have been a better suited with a superhero character than the Clive Barker characters, which are, I'm sorry to say, probably more difficult to work with in a comics medium. So Saint Sinner could have been a pretty good comic, but I think they had the wrong creative team, and they were trying too hard to make it something deep and philosophical when it could have been just a fun book. But the artist also did pick up his game a little bit. There was some of the art was much, much better in here. Not a lot of it, but it was definitely a step up for Richard Pace, and there are some really good scenes here with profiles and shading techniques with the heavy charcoal lines that actually work, unlike previous issues where, again, they were trying to be too psychedelic. Here there actually was some really good art. It was a little bit of a mixed bag still. I'd still say that he needed more work practicing in like indie comics before he could have got to this professional level, but there's definitely more talent displayed in this issue than there was in the previous issues. So yeah, it was overall a mediocre book, but it was definitely a step up from the first 4 issues. Yeah, I think given enough time and a little more either different control or more leeway depending on the circumstances behind it, I think the creative team could have done some better work, and this is definitely a sign of that. So still mediocre though, but that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello, and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. Today we're looking at Saint Sinner issue 6. This is part of the so-called Barkerverse under the Razorline imprint. These are, of course, characters created by Clive Barker. Now, this is written by Elaine Lee, with pencils by Larry Brown, ink by Rick Bryant, and J.L. Pays. Color, Tom DeFalco was the editor-in-chief back in these days. And quite honestly, this issue is one of the better written ones in the series, but the art is still really horrible. It mixes, because there are some scenes that look pretty good, and a lot of them that look like garbage. So I'm not entirely sure what they were thinking when they put this out. But anyway, we pick up with the Saint in the ectosphere clawing his way back toward the world of the living. And there is a demon-possessed guy named Merchion Smith. He's a TV executive, and he strikes a deal with the other Smith demons to use the power of television to enthrall people. And the Saint follows this half-faced girl through her hula hoop to get to New York, and then he slips through there, and he finds his body and quickly re-inhabits it. Then there's this weird chase scene with these cops chasing a armed robber, and the Sinner sees it as 2 different incidents, one with a black perpetrator and one with like a 1920s perpetrator, and even the cops are different. So it's really weird, but he's can't do anything about that because there's some lady or whatever got shot, and this kid disappears, and he has to use a video camera to open a gateway where he steals a taxi with people in it, and they're going to cross over to where the 3 friends that he made are, and it's really weird. I know I'm not describing this really well, but it's a very convoluted kind of plot. This one is actually probably the best written of the series that I've read so far. Like I said, it's a very difficult to explain situation, but actually this story was a lot better than the others. I think they were trying to boost sales and get things rolling a little more. It's interesting too because there's only one more issue in this series, but in the back of this issue there is a subscription offer for all 4 titles. Well, this one ended the next issue, and Ecto Kid ended on issue 9, and the other 2, same thing. One of them lasted until issue 7, the other went to issue 9. This one solidifies my belief that Elaine Lee really did have some talent, just not for this series. But yeah, this was, the art is just horrific in this. It's not Marvel level professionalism. It looks like an indie book, and not that good of an indie book. The art is too stylistic, it's too abstract, it doesn't really fit with the theme of the book. Although the book is trying very, very hard to be Sandman, it's failing miserably. I don't know, the art, I don't think the artist was prime time ready. That'll do it for this one. I'm gonna say this one's a pass. The cover's okay, but that scene doesn't appear in the book, and although this story is better, it's still just, it's too late in the game and I could see why it wasn't salvageable at this point. But we'll look at the final issue in another episode coming up. In the meantime, that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Saint Sinner issue 7. This is the last issue in the series. This is of course part of the Clive Barker superhero universe of the Razorline imprint. Now we pick up where last issue left off with the Saint Sinner driving a cab full of people through a gate. And this story actually really makes it clear this could have been a really good comic if they had brought down the philosophical pseudo-intellectualism. Now this is written by Elaine Lee again, with art by Larry Brown, inks by Bryant and Morissette, colors by Maria Parwoliski. Now the art is a lot cleaner in this issue, so I'm not overly upset, but it's still not that great. So anyway, these 5 people in the cab are drawn into the ectosphere. One of them is a dead lady, so we learn each of their roles in this scenario from this half-faced girl that the Saint had met previously in the previous story arc when he had been kicking around in Ecto Kid and Saint Sinner issue 5s. We've got a kid with cancer, we've got a mother that worries about him, we've got a worried father whose baby disappeared, which is why they're there, a drug addict, and the Saint. So we learn about the half-faced girl's origin and how her grandmother pushed her in front of a subway car, but there's something more to her, but we're not real clear on what. And we learn that the time distortion the Saint saw in the previous issue was from a Tempest Magus. According to Kento Kanto, it's a sentient fourth-dimensional creature. Its physical being finds expression in time rather than mass. And that's why they had experienced that time distortion. Well, the baby gets snatched up into a place called the Exit Sphere. Now, that place was created when the babies of children that had been brought back to life were resurrected, as it were. So when a sick baby died, it was supposed to go to the other side, but instead the doctors were able to save it, and it created this extra dimensional pocket by not letting those kids go back. So the Saint figures out that the only way to get the kid back is to switch the babies. Well, it turns out the drug addict is somebody who doesn't want to live. So the Saint Sinner reverts him back into baby form and sends him with the cancer kid into this other realm, because the Saint can't go himself, but the sick kid can, because he's already half dead. Now of course the kid's mom doesn't want him to, but it doesn't matter, he's the only one that can do it. Well, Bull Baby goes with him, they pull him through into this rift world, and Bull Baby goes with him to kind of protect him and keep an eye on things. And the kid manages to switch babies with the mother of the child, the dead woman. So her soul is willing to switch the living baby for the dead one, but the living kid is half dead as well because it had been injured by a stray bullet previous issue. So the sick kid comes back, and Saint Sinner is able to cure his cancer in this other world, and they quickly send everybody in the cab back through the rift, and the taxi crashes into a television screen where one of the sinister evil guys is on TV, Blake Merchant Smith. And that would have been a lead up to a larger battle had the series continued. And we're kind of left there with Saint Sinner being torn between his multiple personalities and whatnot, and the series ends. It was actually a really good story if they had toned down, like I said, the pseudo-intellectualism and trying to sound smarter than it was, and just had a simple story of, okay, this is what needs to be done, as I laid it out, but, you know, obviously in 32 pages of comics, it would have been a stronger issue. It probably would have been a great issue if they had done that, because it was a good story concept. It just tried too hard to be something greater. And I think that was the major failing of this, was they were trying to compete with a book like Sandman, Book of Magic, stuff like that. They were trying way too hard to look like one of those Vertigo titles when it's not really... the concept is good enough for that, but they didn't have the right creative team on it. And I don't think it would have worked then either. I think there was only so much of a market for those type of books. So yeah, if they had played it more as a straight up superhero story without all the intellectualism, it probably would have been a really good book. This issue would have been great, but the title itself would have been really good. But instead they were trying to do all this mysticism nonsense. So I think that really hurt it in the long run and made it kind of a convoluted mess when it could have been just a nice simple concept that worked, and they tried too hard. But I don't think that Elaine Lee is without talent. I think this was just the wrong book for that talent. Overall, this was the best issue in the series, quite honestly. It's the one that made the most coherent sense, which is still not a whole lot, but at least it had a beginning, middle, and end. Unfortunately, before they could kind of right the ship, I think they were in the right direction with this issue, but before they could correct, it was too late. I'm a little disappointed. I think the character has a lot of potential to be an interesting character if you tone down the highfalutin nature of it and make it more of a straight up adventure story and explain the powers, explain what he's doing. This issue did a much better job, but overall the series is crap at it. So if you're going to pick up an issue of this series, pick up this one. It's the only one worth tracking down. I would only pick it up if it was in a 50-cent bin or a $1 bin. I don't think it's worth more than that. So yeah, unfortunately, Saint Sinner was a pretty big disappointment, although the concept I thought was really good. But that'll do it for this episode. As always, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, and we hope to see you on the next episode.